Ambassador Leah there at the UN. Now, Syria, Russia, and the United States agreeing to extend this truce to the besieged city for 48 hours. Aleppo has been, as you know, a hotbed of violence over the past 2 weeks, and Kamran Bokhari is now with us. He's a fellow at George Washington University, also a senior lecturer. He joins me now to discuss these latest developments. Let's start with this deal for Aleppo. You just heard Ali Ibrahim say that, it really hasn't taken effect. What do you expect of it? Is it going to make a difference?
No. Quite frankly, it's not going to make a difference. If you notice, we've been talking about a ceasefire since it was put in place several weeks ago, probably a couple of months ago. Was there ever a ceasefire? We've always heard of fighting. Everybody's accusing the other of violating the ceasefire. So it seems like the world does not, the international community and the stakeholders just don't want to call it open warfare. They want to maintain formal ceasefire circumstances, but the fighting continues.
Well, let's go to that, too, because one of the ambassadors, the UK ambassador to the UN, said today that the Syrian people had lost confidence in the international body, the UN. They really haven't stepped up, have they? This has been going on for some time. What can the UN do, though?
The UN is essentially the Security Council, and the Security Council is made up of 5 permanent members. The 5 permanent members, if they agree on something, something may happen. If they don't agree, then things won't happen. And then even if they do agree, the question is, who's going to enforce a UN resolution or some agreement? You have to have, those forces. Nobody has those forces on the ground.
Human Rights Watch recently said the United States and Russia, as co-chairs of the Syria ceasefire task force, which was set up in February to monitor indiscriminate attacks, and this basically gets to what you were saying, need to adopt robust measures to deter further indiscriminate attacks or use of weapons with indiscriminate effects. There's this talk now that American-Russian military members will be coordinating more closely. Is that a step in the right direction?
I don't want to say it's not a step in the right direction. But keep in mind that what people are not talking about is this unwritten understanding between Washington and Moscow that neither side wants the Assad regime to fall. There's no incentive for them to support the rebels. So, in other words, the Russians helping Assad was kind of like a favor to Washington, something that Washington couldn't do openly itself.
Well, which is interesting because Secretary of State John Kerry said you can't end this as long as Assad continues because Assad cannot reunite the country. It's that simple. I watched this talk that you gave where, when you look at the leaders that have fallen, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, all these strong leaders, as you point out, ISIS, there's a vacuum there. ISIS moves in. If Assad were to fall, and already we see ISIS getting a toehold. Is this kind of a Pollyanna approach that the U.S. has in terms of foreign policy towards this region?
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, you only do what you can do. There are constraints. The United States is a superpower, no doubt about that. But even superpowers on their level, at their scale, are constrained. And the United States does not have the forces to pacify Syria. We've seen what happened in Iraq. We've seen what happened in Afghanistan. And so the United States is saying, this is something we can't take care of, and it wants the regional powers to take the lead. Now, the problem with that is you have Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran as the 3 major regional powers, and they all of them don't get along at all.
How do you get everybody on the same page, or is it impossible?
At this stage, it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
So then talk to us, analyze it further out. What are we looking at? We saw in Lebanon, it was a 15-year civil war. I mean, is that what we're looking at?
Yes, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I even suspect it may take longer in the case of Syria because when Lebanon was being patched together, Syria existed as a state, as a stakeholder, and enforced things. Right now, Syria itself is gone as we knew it. I don't know if you saw my paper I wrote a few weeks ago called The Destruction of the Syrian and Iraqi States. Syria and Iraq, as we have known them, do not exist. So in that kind of situation, what can you expect other than warfare?
So do you carve it up, small patches, this group has this patch? I mean, how do you see it?
It's already carved up. Nobody can carve it up in that sense. De facto, ISIS controls X amount of Syria. The government has X amount of territory. The rebels have a certain amount of territory. It's already carved up de facto. Nobody has to formally do that.
Kamran Bokhari, always a delight having you on the broadcast with analysis. Appreciate it.
Thank you.